We're back, episode 10 of Just Local, and I have a guest coming back onto the podcast today, and it's James, our lettings manager in our Nicol and Co business, our estate agency business. James, welcome back. You're our first guest back on episode number 1 for Just Local. How's it feel to come back?
It's a real pleasure, actually. Thanks for having me, Matt. It's really, really good, and I'm really pleased to see sort of how it's all been going as well. I think it's been really, really positive so far. The responses have been good. I think the guests have been really good as well. So yeah, it's been great.
Super. Well, and as you said, you come into the studio, there's a lot more going on in here now as well. And Sophie's really had her way with all the cameras and equipment. So we've got better lighting and everything on. And so last time we had you into the studio, we were talking about your book Home. Any standout feedback from readers? How's that gone?
Yeah, positive. It's been an interesting experience. I really didn't know what to expect from the marketing side of things, but we've had some really good feedback from clients. I've had one particular client basically just congratulate me on putting my head above the parapet with it, really, which was really nice to hear. And he ended up recommending a couple of other sort of parties of interest that I thought I could get in touch with and have conversations with, which has been really good as well. And on top of that, we had, off the back of the Landlord seminars, we've been giving them out at the Landlord seminars, we had an agent come from Nottingham, Luke, and he came and he's basically made the decision to put an affiliate link on the book, and also he's bought a few copies off me. He's actually now gifting to landlords as well. So
yeah, it's quite nice to see all the landlords asking you to sign copies of the book, and you went a bit red then, and the feelings coming back to you again.
Yeah, absolutely.
So also, what's been going on with the lettings market since your last appearance?
So much the same in terms of demand from tenants. We've seen, even through the winter months, an average of 25 inquiries to every single property we've been listing. So it's been madness in that respect, which I think landlords can take note of, in that there's definitely room in the market as far as, if they were to list their property today, they'd have confidence that they could find a tenant. I think there's, with the changing governments that we talked about last time, with the upcoming Renters' Rights Bill, there's more questions around the market, and landlords are looking at their sort of longer term planning, but they're sort of getting the right information together, and we're still seeing some decisions being made. We've got a portfolio landlord who's actively buying at the moment, with a number of properties locally. So yeah, there's some really good examples of positive things happening in the market.
Cool. And then you mentioned the Renters' Rights Bill, so you've been following that quite closely.
Yeah.
Can you kind of break down the key changes? Because this is one of the reasons I wanted to get you back on, because this is really coming to the fore now in terms of landlords' thoughts and considerations and concerns actually as well.
Absolutely.
You've been keeping very close to it, been down to London recently. Could you just give the landlords a bit of a run through of what's to come and what your thoughts are?
Yeah, 100%. So the London visit was a conference which you very kindly helped me get set up on, which really gave a good summary of the bill with a professional solicitor who's very close to the ground on it, amongst a number of other speakers. Got to meet Kevin Hollinrake MP, who's the Shadow Housing Secretary, and he was partially involved in the bill originally in terms of getting that set up when it was the Renters Reform Bill under the Tory party. So he's well versed in it, which was really, really good to see. The key concerns are Section 21 notices and tenancy agreements. Section 21 notice being the notice used to end a tenancy, which at the moment is 2 months' notice, which is given without reason. That's the big part of the bill that's changing, combined with a number of other things, more allowances for pets in properties. There's plans for, you'll already be aware of AWOB's law, which is actually a social housing matter to do with housing health and safety, which came around very recently with some mould and mildew problems related to that. So they're looking at how housing health and safety law and bringing it closer to the private rented sector. They're talking about an ombudsman and a landlord register independently, so that government can monitor who is actively a landlord and how they can get around that. So they're the kind of key highlights of the bill.
Sorry to interrupt you there, but in terms of that Section 21, because I think that's probably something that a lot of people will be concerned about. What do you think the concerns will be for landlords if they are going to abolish the Section 21 no-fault evictions?
Sure. So the main concern was, frankly, how am I going to get my property back? The good news is it's when you start getting into the intricacies, it starts to make a little bit of sense. At the moment, if you're on a fixed term contract, say you're in for 12 months, during that 12 months, you've got confidence that you're not going to get served with that Section 21 because you can't while that time frame is in place. But as soon as you're outside of that time frame, in theory, the landlord could give 2 months notice. And I think the theory is from the government that there's been a lot of discussion about landlords deciding to serve notice without clear reasoning. They don't plan to have the house back for any particular reason. They just might not get on with the tenants. I think that's a bit of an oversight. I think that's less frequent than most of the situations. Most of the situations come down to a landlord either deciding to sell or deciding to move back in. Their circumstances have changed. They need to release equity to do something else. There's usually a more planned reason for it. So the way in which the new legislation has been put together is that from the moment that it becomes law, which is expected to be around about August this year, Royal Assent is supposed to be the spring. August is supposed to be when it actually sort of hits the ground and becomes a legal requirement. Every single tenancy in the UK will shift from whether you're on a fixed term, whether you're on a month-to-month periodic, you're going to shift to what's called an assured periodic tenancy. Every single tenancy in the country from that moment is going to become month-to-month. And the idea behind it is that a tenant will then have flexibility to move. They will be able to give a landlord 2 months' notice at any time should they wish to vacate. And that allows for, at the moment, you've got a problem with fixed term where you've got an early release. So let's say tenants signed up for a year, then they lose their job, but they get offered a job elsewhere up north and they've got to travel or something like that. They'd have to pay quite a significant penalty to be removed from that contract, which at a time of affordability when they've just lost their job might not be feasible. So again, they're trying to minimise those sorts of things from happening. And then on the flip side, landlords will still be able to serve notice, but it will be under Section 8 of the Housing Act, which is already in use for a number of other things. At the moment, it's already in use for rent arrears, when you've got sort of significant arrears. It's in use for antisocial behaviour. It's in use for those sorts of breaches of tenancy that usually are deemed discretionary grounds in court. So you'd only use them in an instance of combining them with another thing to make sure that you actually won that case. So that's the thought behind it. But they're adding 2 grounds, one of them being to move back in and another one being to sell. And they're changing the timescale from 2 months to 4 months. So effectively, as long as you serve Section 8 notice and you list that within it, you should be able to get possession of the property. The caveat is that they want it to be over a 12-month period. So even though you're on a month-to-month rolling contract, if your tenant's just moved in, you have to wait at least 8 months so you can then serve that 4 months notice to 12 months before it works. But that's the outline of the plan.
Okay. I'm very pleased you work for me. You definitely know your stuff. That's super. But so landlords obviously a bit worried that this can make it harder for them to manage their tenancies and their properties. Is there anything, any truth behind that? Do you think it's going to cause a few problems for landlords?
I think short term, it's the usual thing. Whenever a piece of legislation lands, that you've got this confidence issue, you've got this sort of concern. There's a lot of landlords that have asked me a lot of questions. Yeah. So I've had a number of lengthy conversations now about, okay, so if this bill comes into play, should I sell? Should I do this? Should I change something about the way that my property is set up? And the answer is that if you've got a good quality tenant now, rents aren't changed. You still be able to review your rent every year. It's going to be formatted slightly differently, and you'd have to serve what's called a Section 13 notice to increase your rent. But otherwise, that process almost remains the same. If anything, it improves because you'd be looking at whatever the market rate is to determine your rent, which is better than a lot of tenancy agreements at the moment. So that's not really changing. There's a confidence issue, but I think when it actually happens, you'll get sort of through the first few months up to a year where some landlords will be a little bit unsure about the process, but then it will become a normal arrangement like any other piece of legislation that's landed before it. Mm-hmm. So
is there any other kind of positives for the landlords? You just mentioned then about obviously the market rent being one of the factors, but is there anything else you can kind of see that would be a...
I feel like the whole bill is just a little bit moot on both sides. I feel like it's scaring some landlords, which could cause more of a supply problem, which is just going to have an impact on tenants as far as rents are concerned, because rents will increase again. Yeah. and there's nothing really in there that I think long term benefits tenants either, for that very reason. So no, there isn't anything specific that I'd say, oh, that's going to be really, really good, positive change for landlords. I think it could be better regulation for the sector, but I think it's just going to be getting your head round a new process more than anything.
Yeah, and a process that's been in for some time is the additional stamp duty that landlords have had to incur when they've been buying investment properties, which is, as you kind of mentioned, probably caused a bit of a rise in rents because there's been less landlords buying that. Why do you think it is that the landlords aren't quite, there as often now buying properties? Where do you think it's kind of impacted the investment market?
I think one of the things that had a big impact on that was interest rates increasing, because if you'd already had this, one of the things that gets brought up a lot in amongst sort of property mark members who are our regulating body and similar is this issue with the Section 21 of the Finance Act, when they brought in the fact that you couldn't claim your tax back on your mortgage interest. So that from a cost perspective is very big. And then when interest rates increased on top of that, I think it meant for landlords that were quite highly leveraged, it made it a little bit more difficult for them. I think that's evening out now. Now we've seen mortgage rates drop a little bit. I stand by your original comments that you made at the last landlord seminar about the tax changes, is that if you're going to make a decision based on that upfront stamp duty cost to not go ahead, it probably isn't the right deal anyway. No. It's a frustration and it's an added cost, but if you think about the long-term project in itself, property prices are still increasing year on year, and rents are still increasing year on year. So it's still a solid investment. And
if you're looking at kind of interest rates versus yield as well, because the rents have been pushed up because there's been a shortage of supply, it feels like the yields are now kind of 6 and 7% again, whereas opposed to they used to be 4 or 5, and you could see then why a landlord wouldn't necessarily jump at the chance, because if their interest rate with the bank's going to be 4 or 5%, plus it's only 4 or 5% yield, it's not worth it. But if you're getting 6 or 7 and you're paying 4, then actually there's a real positive there, because you've got the income return obviously, but then also you've got that yield and the value of the property going up over time. So I've recorded with Soph something we're going to post in the next couple of days, and it was quite an interesting experience and exercise, because nationwide, I think the average price 10 years ago based on Nationwide's figures was 190, and if you're going to put down 25% deposit and you had some of your fees on top, it's about £57,000 you put in. Talking about leveraging, you only have to put a deposit in, you don't have to pay it cash, you can put a deposit in, and then you've got 75% of balance, which will be an interest payment. Obviously that'll be probably interest only loan as well. And then as time's gone on, now if you look at what Nationwide's saying, I think it's 269,000 the average price. So it's gone from 190 to 269 in the space of 10 years. Your £57,000 that you put in at the beginning is in there. Your 75% loan is still 75% loan because it's interest only, you're not been paying the balance down. But actually that increase, I have it written down, from 57 has gone to 136. So you've had a 76 grand increase on what you've actually put in.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So
yeah,
I understand why landlords are concerned, because if you think about renters' rights bill, if you think about stamp duty, if you hear all these negatives, you're going to go in, I'll just leave my money in the bank, it'd be fine. But actually what you would have done is miss out on 79 grand increase on your £57,000 you put down. So significant opportunities out there, I think, isn't there?
Yeah, and my only thought on that is it's not only just the yield from the capital increase. If you look at the rental yield over time as well, if you remember rents were always increasing, I sort of thought about sort of a similar project recently. We had I recently started advertising a flat to let at £875 per month in Droitwich. And that flat was bought by the owner for £90,000 back in 2015. So we're 10 years on. The flat itself is now worth closer to 125,000–130,000. And now the rent at 875, that wouldn't have been what they were getting right there and then, admittedly, but now at 875, the yield alone on that is around 11%. So then you add on an extra 3–4% for the increase in capital value, and you're looking at 15% overall yield, which is better than you can get in the stock market. It's really better than you can get anywhere else. I know it's a gross yield overall, and you've got costs to consider, but if you think about it for the long term, and I think that's the thing that is important to note with property, is it's a long-term investment strategy. It's not something that you can always just I mean, you can do flipped projects, but you've got to know and have the experience to do that. But it is something, if you're thinking as a long-term investment strategy, laws change, they're always going to change, but property prices, generally speaking, have always been strong.
And even though if it's a slow growth period, which I think we are kind of finding ourselves in, there's still the opportunity, and actually it's probably a good time to buy as well, because if you're doing it when everyone else is trying, the prices go up. When interest rates went low just after kind of pandemic and we got released, we were allowed out of our houses, you found that prices shot up because obviously interest rates were low, everyone was trying to buy a house. And I think we're now in that period where you've obviously got a savvy, smart investor who's trying to buy a few for his portfolio at the moment, but there aren't that many that are really looking at it right now. You talked about obviously that 15% of gross yield, and obviously there's cost to bear and cost to consider. Do you find that kind of is helping a little bit with concerns about renters' rights? But do you find a few more landlords are saying, I don't want let only anymore, James, I need to have it fully managed? Is that starting to happen a little bit more just because of the ramifications of getting it wrong?
Yeah, funnily enough, I had one sign up for exactly that just over the weekend. So we are definitely seeing some of that. I think that the thing is with having a managing agent is that, you know, like ourselves, we've got our ears to the ground on what's going on. We know this detail. So, and it can be hard to navigate. I think there's already something like 150, 160 different pieces of legislation in lettings. So having your ear to the ground on that stuff is important. And I do often find with let-only clients that there'll be gaps in the knowledge because they're doing other things. They're working full-time themselves. They've got their own day-to-day life to run. So having a trusted advisor can be really beneficial.
Makes a lot of sense. And is there any kind of ways that smart landlords can kind of adapt to the potential changes without thinking that the only option is to exit? Because if, as we've just demonstrated over 10 years, someone's had that kind of increase in equity, plus obviously the rental income that's probably paid the mortgage and then put some money in the bank, is there other reasons that landlords should hold on? How do they kind of get through this next period of time? Yeah,
lots of considerations. I think getting advice from the different points of relevance is important. So for example, having the right tax advisor, somebody that can give you the right guidance on your portfolio based on your earnings and your income. So if you're earning over a certain salary bracket, and if you're buying an investment property, it might make more sense to buy it in a corporation as opposed to buying it in your own name, because that way you're potentially saving on tax liabilities. And likewise, if you're going to leverage the property, you're going to put a mortgage to it, getting the best mortgage advice out there you can, really, really important to get the best deal. And again, limited companies versus personal name, you've got different options available there. Insurance is another thing. I think insurance is an assumption because you only need, as a minimum, buildings insurance. It's an assumption that that's all you need, but actually in the longer term, things like the Renters' Rights Bill, having a good quality insurance policy will save you a lot of money. If you have problems with rent arrears, there's insurance policies out there that cover rent guarantee and legal expenses that could be really, really beneficial. There's things like fire and flood, alternative accommodation costs are covered, and those sorts of things. And it sounds like a lot of upfront costs potentially, but if you look at the overall picture, you have all of those things in place. Most of those costs, with the exception of mortgages, are tax deductible, including management fees. Mm-hmm. So the more you spend on a management fee, you're getting a value out of the service. Whereas if you just go let only, in theory, you're going to be paying more to the taxman because it's not something you've been able to deduct. So yeah, that's the way I would look at it, is the forward planning of it to save you money in the long term.
Yeah. And a message to new investors, so for those that don't know, if you do want to buy with a mortgage, you need to typically put down 25% deposit. Is there any other kind of advice you'd say to first-time investors thinking to get their first rental property, anything they can look out for? Great properties, what's the best theory behind it, would you say?
Sure. So locally, the experience has been 2-bedroom freehold properties in good areas with potentially nearby schools, nearby workplaces. So looking at Worcestershire on the whole, St Peter's, Warner Villages, looking at the Primsland area, typically a 2-bedroom freehold house, or even a 1-bedroom in a lot of instances as well, tends to be the sweet spot. You haven't got to worry about sort of leasehold charges related with that. You haven't got to worry about lease length where you have with flats, and flats do let very well, but they do tend to have a higher turnover. And sort of your 2-bedroom houses and some 3-bedroom houses as well have both the benefit of really good solid capital appreciation and that sort of balanced rent that you can expect to increase year on year.
Yeah.
So that's, in my opinion, the sweet spot in the market.
And if a landlord was listening to all this and felt overwhelmed by all the change, renters' rights bill, stamp duty increase from the end of March for any investor and all those bits and pieces, is there one thing that you think they should focus on right now if they were trying to get into this market?
Just get as much advice as you can.
Right.
As much forward planning, go back to my book really, forward planning as much as you can in that first process. So make sure you're making sort of notes, you go into seminars, and speaking with your local agent and finding out what you need to know about the market, what it's doing, where the best buys are. We have a monthly mailer that goes out every month, which just kind of indicates the best rental yields for properties that we have available, amongst a number of other things. Getting signed up to things like that, plus news articles connected to it, can be really, really important just to make a bit of a strategy.
You're right, and even if you're doing that way before you actually plan to purchase, so if you're still saving hard, you're thinking August, September, October is when you really want to start dipping your toe and buying, learning now and absorbing all that information would be useful, wouldn't it? It would just be building up your knowledge. You mentioned Home, your book, and any more plans for another one? Got another version coming out next follow-up?
I don't know whether I was really adamant with the first book that I'd written it based on principles, and I didn't want to start changing the book itself without sort of messing with the core of it. But I do wonder whether there is something, whether it needs to be either an adjustment to the current book or something completely separate, connected with the Renters' Rights Bill, that just gives landlords just something else to peruse really on it. It might be a case of it's updating a few more pages in the book, and as simple as that. But again, I don't want to keep coming back to it, and you're right, I'd like to start thinking about other projects. I've got thoughts and processes in mind, but we've got lots going on here as well, and I've got a lot of focus on the business right now and where we want to take it. So
he's only saying that because I'm sat here. Going back to landlord seminars, because you said, if someone's serious about wanting to get into property investment, even if they don't think they've got the money yet, but they're going to get there eventually, what would you suggest? Obviously, landlord seminars recommended locally. Is there any that you can think of?
In terms of potential,
this is your chance to plug our landlord seminar we have coming up, James. Yes.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So we've got the 1st of May at 6 Ways. That's going to be a great event. We're expecting speakers from insurance through to mortgages and similar. So that's going to be a really, really good event. And that's, as I say, 6 Ways. It'll be an evening event. I think it's a Thursday evening. And we plan to do 3 this year. We'll do another one in the summer, and we'll do another one in the autumn as well. Yeah,
fantastic. I look forward to seeing that one. I think I've got to say a few bits as well. But exciting projects or plans on the horizon, James? What have we got coming up?
Yeah, so Nicol and Co, we've been busy, haven't we? We're expecting a build-to-rent project coming our way, which would be a mixture of build-to-rent and sale. So that's going to be a big change to the rest of the sort of team arrangements. Potentially lots of properties to let, which again would be good for a bit of cooling in the sort of the heat of the market. And it's the right sort of stock that we want in Worcester. It's fresh, it's new, it's going to be good.
Yeah, I mean, there is, as you said, at any one time there's 25 inquiries for each property to let, and it's maxed out like 52 inquiries I think we had in 1 month. It was an averaging averaging 52 inquiries per property we had to advertise, which is saddening really, that there just isn't enough stock out there. So a build to rent scheme, for those people that don't know or haven't heard of these before, it's when you see typically an investment that's been purchased or built to be rented out in essence, and it'll be a lot of units all coming to the market in one go, which will be something that we'll phase slightly because we don't want to put them all on in one fell swoop, but it does hit some of that demand quite early, and it's quite a nice thing to, you kind of almost feel like we're going to solve a bit of a problem for a period of time as well. So and with the development plans for Worcester and Shrub Hill and kind of the progression back in towards the city, hopefully it'll be the first of many, and actually it will help people who are at the moment sofa surfing because they're losing out against competition when they're trying to rent something. We know we have to disappoint people with every property we take to the market pretty much, don't we, at the moment?
100% we do, yeah. It's very, very frustrating. And I think something like this as well is an opportunity for people who want a different lifestyle. There's sort of elements alongside it that will give people the opportunity, potentially a gym or similar, just some sort of communal living space. And it's going to be just really good both economically and from a lifestyle change point of view for some people. So.
Yeah, and I think it's quite new and novel for Worcester, because it's something you probably hear happening in Birmingham and Manchester and those cities.
Big city thing, yeah.
But actually, it's going to be the first foray into it. So co-working, co-living space, I think, is a real positive. It's going to create that bit of community. And yeah, very exciting prospect, which no doubt we'll be able to tell you more about in the not too distant future. So James, we don't normally kind of end with this question, but just so that people can, what's the best way for people to reach out to you if they need any help or support? Because everyone's going to have different problems when it comes to investment. They're all going to have either their properties that they already own, or they're going to have ideas for new ones. So what's the best way for them to reach out to you? Don't have to give your mobile number out, but what's the best way?
It'd be through Nicol and Co, really. So we've got a dedicated lettings line, and you can reach us there. We've got a team of 4 in the lettings team that we're all working on these things at the moment. If for whatever reason I'm unavailable, either the team can help, or I can book a call with you, so we can do it that way. Do you want me to give the numbers?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. So it's 01905 675 999, and email is james@nicolandco.co.uk.
James Gwynne, thank you ever so much for coming on episode number 10 on Just Local. I love listening to you hear about all these kind of lettings legislations. It really is your sweet spot, to be honest, and gives me great comfort, and also gives your landlords great comfort as well. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Cheers.